I'm going to summarize the jobs report today, which, along with the Republican tariff taxes on virtually all foreign countries, with Russia still an exception, I believe, caused a small negative reaction in the stock market today, but a strong rally in bonds and a flight to safety move by investors. I don't think that the rise in bond prices today have had anything to do with the inflation or inflation expectations, but simply a fear response to what is happening in the economy. Since I am heavily weighted in bonds, in my four brokerage accounts that are taxable, and that would be less so in my Roth IRA accounts, I will be up today as I more fully discuss in a comment that I left earlier this afternoon to my last blog post. Most of my stocks are in bond-like stock sectors, and many experienced gains today due to the decline in interest rates that make their dividend yields more attractive. I focus a lot on dividend yields that would be in excess of 5% at my total cost. The 73,000 in new jobs for July was very weak, but that was not the scary part. I have been expecting a weaker job market as the months progress in 2025. The most important part of the report was that the May and June numbers were revised down by a combined 258,000. The May new jobs number was revised to just plus 19,000 and June to another barely positive 14,000. To the extent that there were any new jobs in July, which may prove to be not the case if the 73,000 number is revised in the subsequent reports. The jobs were concentrated in just one industry, healthcare. No one should be surprised that job numbers may turn negative soon, provided the BLS still has some independence from Trump cooking the books. Trump fired today the head of the BLS statistics. She was a lifelong government employee. She was not the one that actually compiled the statistics that Trump did not like. That is done by civil servants that are protected by civil service, but Trump has been firing even those people, so their jobs are not secure. And the message that Trump is sending to them is that you better report the numbers that I want, or you're going to lose your job. In Trump's America, as Trump sees it, the economy is incredibly strong, and the statistics need to conform to that reality creation of his. None of the statistics from other government agencies or private firms that compile statistics support Trump's claim. It has been obvious for months now that the U.S. economy is weakening. Maybe Tulsi Gabbard can replace the fired career government employee and everyone else that compiles any data that Trump does not like. She will do what Trump tells her to do. We have an Orwellian government in the United States now. It was hard to imagine how it could become more so, but the Orwellian nature is creeping into all facets of the U.S. government. I have stated in the past that an early signal for an upcoming recession is a weak jobs report and major revisions in the prior 2 months. It remains to be seen whether this kind of weakness will persist for the upcoming months. Even without the downward revisions for May and June, those months clearly pointed to a rapidly slowing new job creation compared to the strong economy that Trump inherited in January. An interest cut that Trump has demanded, he's demanded a 300 basis point cut, is not like it's a freebie because savers will be penalized severely by those kind of cuts. They will not solve the problems which are structural and have been created by our dear leader, who is legislating now by executive order on all matters that the government formally had done by Congress legislating in the past. These new structural headwinds include the U.S. tariffs levied by Trump by executive order on all countries except for Russia, as far as I can tell. Foreign country retaliation to U.S. tariffs, which will hurt U.S. exporters. Mass deportation of undocumented immigrants who fill important roles in the supply chain, particularly in agricultural and construction and in many small manufacturing firms, and mass firings of the federal government workers. Those policies will cause inflation to accelerate, in my opinion, for the remaining months in 2026, and that acceleration will be gradual, in my opinion, and then will continue into 2026. And they will also result in an economic slowdown that will be consistent with a stagflation scenario starting in the United States this year. And as I said, interest rate cuts are not a freebie for the economy. And I recall citing some studies in 2008 that discussed how the ZIRP, the zero interest rate policy of the Federal Reserve, had taken about $400 billion of money away from savers that they could spend, save, or reduce debt with. A 1/2 point cut to the federal funds rate will take away the small benefit the Republicans have seen fit to give me within 2 months after it occurs. And cutting interest rates when inflation is moving higher is likely to cause long-term bond yields to rise as investors question whether the Fed is going to restrain the onset of problematic inflation, as it failed to do in 2021 and 2022, making the second biggest policy mistake, in my opinion, in Fed history, by keeping extremely stimulative and abnormally low short-term rates and suppressing long-term rates through QE below the inflation rate until the annual CPI rate hit 8.5% in March 2022. They also created a boatload of money with their QE program that was not needed by the economy. Perhaps Trump will honestly explain why the 2024 average monthly job gains was at 186,000, and now the gains are consistent with a movement into a recession. Of course, he explains it by simply saying that partisan Democrats are cooking the books at the BLS, and it's really just career employees that are crunching the numbers, as Trump knows. The buck never stops at Trump's desk and never will either. The weakening labor market is due to his policies. The onset of higher inflation and a possible recession on the horizon can be blamed entirely on him and the Republican politicians in the House and Senate, who might as well give Trump their voting proxies and go on vacation until the midterms. To correct a false statement, and I would spend 24/7 doing this if I wanted to correct all of them, made by Trump earlier today. He claimed that the Federal Reserve cut twice before the November election. That is simply a false statement. The Fed did cut by 50 basis points, 0.5%, in September 2024, but the next cut, which was 0.25, was after the election was over and Trump declared the winner. Anyone can verify that Trump's representation is false on that 2 cuts occurred before the election, and he claims that it was done to help Harris. Trump wants to blame Powell for the problems that Trump has created in the U.S. economy. Powell is only one voting member of the Federal Reserve. The decision to cut rates in September 2024 by 50 basis points was based on moderating inflation trend and was supported by 10 other Fed members, with the sole dissent being Michelle Bowman, who was appointed by Trump. Bowman wanted only a 25 basis point cut rather than the 50 basis point cut that the Fed actually made in September 2024. And I would add that the market's response to the cuts in the federal funds rate from September to December 2024 was to take the 10-year Treasury yield up 100 basis points. That does not help the economy. I am aware that at least 2 other Fed members who voted for the cut in September were appointed by Trump. They are Mary C. Daly and Christopher Waller, both appointed by Trump during his first term. And I would note also that Trump will want the Fed to cut 300 basis points when inflation is rising. So does he have a clue as to what he's saying or doing? Trump has been wildly successful beyond anyone's belief that it was even this possible in manipulating people with a daily barrage of demonstrably false and misleading information that can only be measured in the tens of thousands of units. There's yet no reason to believe that this approach, which has worked on the intended audience, will cease to work during his second term, even if the false statements go over 100,000 for the 2016 to January 2029 timeframe. It is just the world that we live in, and nothing can be done to change it, unfortunately.